The howling autumn wind scattered a flurry of fallen leaves across the remote Wyoming landscape as Wade Tucker urged his exhausted horse up the steep, rocky trail toward his cabin. Blood trickled from a gash on his forearm, an unwelcome souvenir from a run-in with barbed wire while rounding up stray cattle. The year was 1878, and winter was coming early to Medicine Bow. Wade pulled his worn leather coat tighter around his broad shoulders as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. At 32, he'd spent the last decade of his life alone in these mountains after returning from the war, finding solace in the isolation that kept memories of battle at bay. His cabin appeared through the trees, a small wisp of smoke curling from the stone chimney. "Smoke?" he muttered, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver at his hip. He hadn't left a fire burning. Dismounting cautiously, Wade tied his horse to a hitching post and approached silently. The door to his cabin stood slightly ajar, golden firelight spilling onto the porch. Drawing his revolver, he pushed the door open with his boot. What greeted him was entirely unexpected. A woman lay collapsed near his hearth, her face flushed with fever, dark hair spilling across his wooden floor. A small traveling case lay open beside her, contents partially scattered, as if she'd been searching for something before losing consciousness. Wade holstered his weapon and knelt beside her. "Madam?" he said, gently turning her face toward him. Her skin burned beneath his calloused fingers. Her eyelids fluttered briefly, revealing deep brown eyes clouded with fever. "Please," she whispered, "help me." Without hesitation, Wade lifted her slight frame and carried her to his bed, a simple affair with a straw mattress covered in wool blankets. She wore a black dress, and a gold wedding band adorned her finger. A widow, he guessed, noting her traveling alone and the mourning attire. Wade dampened a cloth and placed it on her forehead. "Can you tell me your name, madam?" "Grace," she murmured. "Grace Lawson. I'm Wade Tucker. You're in my cabin, and you're safe now." Her eyes closed again as the fever pulled her back into unconsciousness. Wade examined the small cabin, his home for years now, and realized how unprepared he was for a sick visitor. He had basic supplies, some herbs he'd learned to use from an old trapper, and whiskey, which served as medicine more often than not in these parts. Through the night, Wade diligently tended to Grace, replacing the cool cloth on her forehead, offering sips of water when she stirred, and keeping the fire blazing against the mountain chill. As dawn approached, her fever raged higher, and she began to thrash and mumble. "Thomas," she called out, "the children, save them." Wade held her hand firmly. "You're safe, Grace. I've got you." Her fingers clutched his desperately. "Don't leave me," she pleaded through parched lips. "I won't leave you," Wade promised, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "I'll be right here until morning." He gathered her trembling body into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if he could transfer his strength into her. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he felt a protectiveness surge through him that he hadn't experienced since the war, when he'd held wounded comrades. "I promise I won't leave," he whispered again, more to himself than to her. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cabin's single window, Grace's fever finally broke. Wade felt the change immediately. Her breathing steadied, and the burning heat of her skin gradually cooled to a more natural warmth. Still, he didn't release her, finding an unexpected comfort in holding another human being after so many years of solitude. When Grace finally opened her eyes, the clarity had returned to them. She stared up at Wade, confusion evident on her face. "You kept your promise," she said softly. Wade nodded, suddenly aware of their intimate position. He gently laid her back on the pillow and stood, stretching his stiff limbs. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," Grace admitted, attempting to sit up. I don't remember much after finding your cabin. I was desperate for shelter. What brings a lady like you out here alone? Wade asked, pouring her a cup of water from his canteen. Grace accepted the water gratefully. I was traveling to Oregon. My husband died of consumption 6 months ago in St. Louis. We had planned to start fresh out west before he fell ill. Her voice caught. I decided to make the journey anyway, but my stagecoach was robbed 2 days ago. The driver was killed, and the other passengers scattered. I've been walking since, trying to find help. Wade frowned. That's Brown's Gulch Gang. They've been terrorizing the stagecoach routes for months now. They took everything except what was in my hidden pocket, Grace said, gesturing to the small traveling case. Just a few dollars and my wedding band. You're welcome to rest here until you're stronger, Wade offered, surprised at himself. He'd avoided company for years, preferring solitude to the complications of social interaction. I couldn't impose, Grace protested weakly. It's no imposition. Winter's coming early this year. It wouldn't be safe for you to travel now anyway. Wade moved to the small stove in the corner of the cabin. I'll make us some breakfast. You need to get your strength back. Over the next few days, Grace's health improved steadily. Wade found himself enjoying her company, her gentle voice filling the cabin with stories of her life in St. Louis, where she'd worked as a schoolteacher before marrying Thomas Lawson, a clerk with dreams of owning an orchard in Oregon. He spoke of apple blossoms in spring and the scent of ripe fruit in fall, Grace recalled as they shared a simple supper of rabbit stew. I still want to see that dream realized, even if he can't. Wade nodded, understanding the need to honor promises made to the departed. It's good to have a purpose, he said simply. And what about you, Mr. Tucker? What brought you to this solitary mountain? Wade stared into his bowl. The war, he said finally. Saw too much, did too much, came back different. People in town noticed. Some were afraid. Figured it was better for everyone if I kept to myself. Grace didn't press further, but her eyes held compassion rather than fear. Wade found himself unexpectedly grateful for that. As October gave way to November, the mountain passes began to close with early snowfall. Wade's cabin, once a testament to his isolation, gradually transformed. Grace discovered wild cranberries growing nearby and preserved them in honey. She mended his threadbare shirts and organized his meager supplies. The cabin smelled of dried herbs and fresh bread instead of just wood smoke and leather. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Grace asked, "Will you teach me to shoot? If I'm to make it in Oregon alone, I should know how to protect myself." Wade considered her request. "It's sensible. We'll start tomorrow." The following day, Wade set up targets behind the cabin tin cans placed on a fallen log. He showed Grace how to hold his revolver, standing behind her to guide her arms into position. "Breathe out slowly when you squeeze the trigger," he instructed, acutely aware of her closeness, the scent of pine soap in her hair. Grace's first shot went wide, but by the afternoon, she was hitting targets consistently. The look of accomplishment on her face stirred something in Wade's chest that he thought had died on distant battlefields. "You're a natural," he said, unable to keep the admiration from his voice. Grace lowered the gun, her cheeks flushed from more than just the cold air. "I had a good teacher." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Wade felt as if the world had shrunk to just this clearing. Just this woman with determination in her eyes and a gentle smile playing at her lips. He cleared his throat and stepped back, suddenly overwhelmed. "We should get back. Storm's brewing," he said gruffly, nodding toward gathering clouds. That night, the storm hit with unexpected ferocity. Wind howled through the mountain passes, rattling the cabin's shutters. Wade added logs to the fire, grateful for the substantial woodpile he'd prepared. "Will it last long?" Grace asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she joined him by the hearth. Mountain storms can be unpredictable. Could be days, Wade replied, watching the flames dance. Don't worry, we've got supplies enough. Grace nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I'm not worried. Not anymore. The simple admission hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Wade found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about his childhood in Kentucky, his experiences in the war, and the peace he'd found in these mountains despite the loneliness. Grace listened, occasionally asking questions but never judging. In turn, she spoke of her dreams beyond Oregon, of perhaps starting a small school, of finding community again after losing so much. Do you think it's foolish? She asked. To still hope for happiness after everything? Wade considered her question seriously. No, he said finally. I think it's brave. As days turned into weeks, and November gave way to December, Wade realized with growing certainty that he was falling in love with Grace. The realization terrified him. He'd built his life around independence, around needing no one. Yet now, he found himself looking forward to her smile each morning, to their conversations by the fire each night. One crisp December afternoon, Wade returned from checking his traps to find Grace outside the cabin, staring at the snow-covered mountains with a wistful expression. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, approaching her. Grace turned, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I was just thinking about Christmas. It's only 2 weeks away." Wade shifted uncomfortably. "Haven't celebrated properly in years." "Would you like to?" Grace asked tentatively. "We could cut a small pine tree, make decorations." The hope in her eyes made refusal impossible. "I'd like that," Wade admitted. Together, they selected a small pine near the cabin. Wade cut it down and carried it inside, where Grace had cleared a corner. They spent the evening fashioning decorations from pine cones, dried berries, and scraps of colorful fabric from Grace's traveling case. "My mother taught me to make these stars," Grace explained, deftly folding a piece of red fabric. "We'd make new ones every Christmas." Wade watched her nimble fingers work, mesmerized by the simple joy she took in the task. "My family wasn't much for celebrating," he confessed. "Father was often away, and Mother was strict in her ways." Grace placed the finished star in his hand. "Then we'll make new traditions." On Christmas Eve, they enjoyed a special supper of venison, preserved vegetables, and a small cake Grace had somehow managed to bake using their limited ingredients. Afterward, they sat by the fire, sharing a rare cup of coffee. "I have something for you," Wade said hesitantly, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden carving of a bird in flight. "Made it while you were sleeping. It's not much." Grace took the carving, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's beautiful," she whispered, eyes shining. "I have something for you too." She handed him a knitted scarf in dark blue wool. "I unraveled one of my old stockings. The color reminded me of your eyes." Wade wrapped the scarf around his neck, overwhelmed by the simple gift. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Later that night, as Grace slept in his bed while he took his usual place on a bedroll near the fire, Wade made a decision that would change both their lives. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright. Wade woke early and prepared a surprise breakfast of flapjacks with the last of their maple sugar. The smell roused Grace from sleep. "Merry Christmas," Wade said, placing a plate before her. After breakfast, Wade suggested a walk despite the cold. They followed a path through the pines to a ridge overlooking the valley below. "It's breathtaking," Grace said, gazing at the snow-covered landscape stretching to the horizon. "Grace," Wade began, his heart pounding harder than it had facing Confederate soldiers. "I know you have plans to continue to Oregon come spring." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Yes, I've been thinking," Wade continued, forcing the words past the tightness in his throat, "that Oregon's a long way to go alone." "It is," Grace agreed softly. "That night you came to my cabin, when I promised not to leave you." Wade took a deep breath. "I meant it, not just for that night." Grace's eyes widened. "Wade, I know it hasn't been long, and you're still mourning Thomas. I respect that. But these months with you have shown me what I've been missing all these years. If you'd allow it, I'd like to accompany you to Oregon. Not as a protector or guide, but as—" He faltered. "As what?" Grace prompted, her voice barely audible above the mountain breeze. "As a man who's falling in love with you," Wade admitted. "A man who wants the chance to build something with you if you'll have him." Tears welled in Grace's eyes, catching the winter sunlight. "What about your mountain? Your solitude?" Wade looked around at the familiar landscape. "I've come to realize that some treasures are worth leaving others behind for." Grace stepped closer, placing a gloved hand against his cheek. "I've been afraid to admit it, feeling somehow disloyal to Thomas. But I've fallen in love with you too, Wade Tucker." Wade covered her hand with his own. "I don't aim to replace what you had with him, just hoping to build something new." "I'd like that," Grace whispered, her breath forming a cloud between them. "Very much." Wade bent his head and kissed her, softly at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. The kiss was a promise, sweeter than any words. When they returned to the cabin, the world seemed brighter somehow, despite the short winter day. That evening, they planned their future together: the journey to Oregon in spring, the land they would claim, the home they would build. "I can teach at the local school," Grace said, excitement coloring her voice. "And you can start that horse breeding business you mentioned." Wade nodded, allowing himself to imagine a future filled with purpose beyond mere survival. "We could grow those apple trees Thomas dreamed of too." Grace's eyes softened. "I'd like that. A way to honor him while building our own life." In January, the worst blizzard in years struck the region. For 3 days, the wind howled unceasingly, driving snow into drifts taller than a man. Wade and Grace remained safely sheltered in the cabin, grateful for their ample supplies and each other's company. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Wade ventured out to check on his livestock, finding his 2 horses and single milk cow unharmed in their sturdy lean-to. As he cleared a path through the snow, he spotted movement at the edge of the trees. A rider appeared, bundled against the cold. Wade tensed, his hand moving to his holster, but relaxed when he recognized Sheriff Jim Callahan from the nearest town 20 miles away. "Tucker," the sheriff called, urging his horse forward. "Thought you might have been buried up here." "Takes more than snow to put me under," Wade replied, helping the exhausted lawman dismount. "Come inside and warm up." The sheriff's eyes widened in surprise when he entered the cabin to find Grace preparing lunch. Wade made introductions, explaining Grace's presence with a simplified version of events. "Glad to see you've got company for once, Tucker," the sheriff said, warming his hands by the fire. "Actually, that's partly why I'm here. News came through before the storm that might interest your lady friend." Grace looked up sharply. "What news?" "Stagecoach robbers were caught trying to fence stolen goods in Laramie. Brown's Gulch gang, same ones that likely attacked your coach." The sheriff accepted a cup of coffee from Grace. "They're being held for trial, and the marshal's trying to return stolen property to rightful owners. Might be worth a trip to Laramie when the pass is clear." Hope flashed across Grace's face. "My mother's locket might be among the items. It's all I had left of her." "We'll go," Wade promised, "soon as it's safe to travel." After the sheriff departed, promising to return with word when the main road was passable, Grace threw her arms around Wade. To think I might get my mother's locket back, it feels like a sign. Wade held her close, savoring her joy. A good beginning for our new life. By mid-February, a temporary thaw made the journey to Laramie possible. Wade and Grace packed provisions for several days and set out on horseback, Grace riding Wade's more docile mare while he took his sturdy gelding. The journey was arduous but uneventful. They spent 2 nights camping, huddled together for warmth, their growing intimacy both thrilling and comforting. Wade found himself opening up about his deepest fears that his war experiences had broken something inside him, that he might not be capable of the gentleness a husband should show. "You've been nothing but gentle with me," Grace assured him, stroking his weathered face in the firelight. "The war may have changed you, but it didn't break you. I see the man you truly are, Wade Tucker." They reached Laramie on the 3rd day, securing a room at a modest boarding house. The next morning, they presented themselves at the marshal's office. "Mrs. Lawson," the marshal greeted Grace, consulting his ledger. "Yes, we've got several items that match your description." He produced a wooden box and opened it. Grace gasped, reaching for a gold locket. "This was my mother's," she confirmed, opening it to reveal a tiny portrait inside. "And these," she touched a pair of pearl earrings, "were my grandmother's." The marshal nodded, satisfied. "There's also this." He withdrew an envelope, found it sewn into the lining of a valise one of the gang members claimed belonged to him. "Has your late husband's name on it." Grace took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a deed to property in the Willamette Valley, already registered in her name, along with bank drafts totaling a considerable sum. "Thomas must have arranged everything before he fell ill," Grace whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He ensured I'd have a future even without him." Wade placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, even as uncertainty crept into his heart. With this unexpected windfall, Grace would have no need for his protection or assistance in Oregon. Would she still want him by her side? That evening in their boarding house room, Grace spread the papers on the small table. 20 acres in the Willamette Valley, with a small house already built, she said, her voice filled with wonder. "And enough money to establish the orchard Thomas dreamed of." Wade nodded, trying to hide his growing apprehension. "It's a fine start for you." Grace looked up sharply. "For us, Wade, if you still want to come with me." "I didn't want to presume," Wade admitted. "Your circumstances have changed considerably since Christmas." Grace moved to stand before him, taking his hands in hers. "My feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've deepened. This land, this opportunity, want to share it with you, build that life together." Relief flooded through Wade. "Are you certain? I don't bring much besides my hands and heart." "That's all I need," Grace said simply. They were married the next day by the local preacher, with the marshal and his wife serving as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, but as Wade placed a plain gold band on Grace's finger to join her first wedding ring, he felt a profound sense of rightness. "2 rings," Grace said later as they prepared to return to the mountain cabin to wait out the remaining winter. "One for the love I lost, one for the love I found. Both part of who I am now." Wade kissed her hand. "And I love all of who you are." They returned to the cabin as husband and wife, spending the remaining winter months planning their journey west and their future together. Wade sold his cabin and land to a young trapper eager to establish himself in the region, keeping only his horses, tools, and personal belongings. As April brought the first hints of spring to the mountains, Wade and Grace loaded their wagon and bid farewell to the place that had brought them together. The journey to Oregon would be long and challenging, but they faced it with confidence in each other and their shared dream. 5 years later, the Tucker orchard in the Willamette Valley was becoming known for its particularly sweet apples. Wade had indeed established a successful horse breeding business, while Grace taught at the local school 3 days a week. Their small house had expanded to accommodate their growing family. 3-year-old Thomas, named for Grace's first husband, and 1-year-old Elizabeth. On the anniversary of the night they'd met, Wade and Grace stood together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the orchard in golden light. Apple blossoms scented the air, just as Thomas Lawson had once described. "Do you ever regret leaving your mountain?" Grace asked, leaning against her husband's strong shoulder. Wade looked down at her, the love of 5 years only deepened by their shared joys and challenges. "Not for a moment," he said honestly. "That night when I found you with fever in my cabin, when I held you until morning and promised never to leave, that was the first true promise I'd made since the war. Keeping it has been the greatest joy of my life." Grace reached up to touch his face, still weathered but now more often creased with laughter than concern. "And receiving it has been mine." As twilight settled over their orchard, Wade gathered his wife in his arms, just as he had on that fateful night years before. Only now, instead of fear and uncertainty, their embrace was filled with the quiet confidence of a promise kept and a love that had flourished against all odds in the wild frontier they now called home.